know. It put beans on our table. But God allows us to be tempted. But our faith is tested daily. Now, sometimes by outside sources, like we talked about verses 1 through 12, or actually 2 through 12. But now we're going to talk more about internal type temptations. Things that are in our mind. What situations do we put ourselves in that allow us to be tempted? The testing of our faith will come in many different forms. Brother Hugh, I'm sure a test of your faith is not the same as the test of Brother Larry's faith or the test of Jimmy's faith. We're all different. God knows that. God in his infinite wisdom created us different. And that's probably a really good thing. If you thought about, ask yourself this question. If the whole world was just like me, what kind of place would this be?
Sure would be nice,
Wouldn't it, great? If we could all be like Chester. Some of us might not think that. You know, it says a man ought not to think more highly of himself, but no. But we do need to have a good understanding of ourselves. We do need to think highly of ourselves. Why?
Because God did us.
We are God's creation. God made us. And God don't make no junk. I know you've heard that before. But yet, how are we tested? Well, let's talk a few minutes for the next verse or two about how we're tested. Look, in Genesis chapter 3, we remember how Eve was tested, don't we? Yes. And then Adam was tested as well. How did they come out according to that temptation? You know, are we a results-driven society? Yes, we are. How do we go through temptation and when we come out on the other side? Let's read 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. And I know we've all read it before, but it says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. I've heard it said that you can take pretty much any sin and put it in one of those three categories. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. And if you think about it, there's probably a lot of validity to that. What makes us sin? Well, let's look at the next verse here. Verse 14. But each one is tempted when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Drawn away from whose desires? His own desires. There are things that don't bother me. Might bother you. There are things that bother me that affect you at all. We each have our own desires, and that's what leads us. Once we are drawn away means to take out of. We take out of our normal thought process. It says our own lust, our own desire. Do we have desires? I like ice cream. I like cookies. Okay? Sometimes that's pretty obvious. My doctor, we have that conversation. She says, I'm going to tell you anyway. I know you disregard it. But I wouldn't be your doctor if I didn't at least tell you every time. That's not good for you. We know that. We can agree with that. But that's a desire I have. That's a physical desire I have. If we look at those desires that we have internally, I don't want anybody to share them out loud because that very well could be embarrassing. But think real hard right now. What is a desire that you have that you think God would not be favorable to? And the purpose of this book, remember James is talking to primarily Jewish Christians. They're already made that decision to follow Christ, just like we have. Think about our own self. He's talking to these people. He's writing to these people to help them to think. And if you think about your own situation, how do you respond to that? If we look at this verse right here, each one is tempted when he's drawn away from his own desires and enticed. Is anything that is enticing to you? Something that entices you. I put an example here about like a fisherman. Okay? Anybody like to fish?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, right? If you were going to catch a bass, what kind of bait would you use?
Or a bass likes eating.
Whatever a bass likes eating. Okay? Now, I don't know what there is. There's no book on it. Now, there's a lot of spinner baits and topwater plugs, and I get that. What about a crappie? What do crappies like to eat? I don't know. You wouldn't fish for a crappie using bass bait, would you? What about a red snapper? A little deeper. I know you like to eat it sometimes. What do they like to eat? You wouldn't fish the same thing with a red snapper that you would try to catch a blue marlin, would you? Or a bonita? Anybody ever caught a bonita? If you ever like fishing, the bonita's incredible. But there again, that's the bait. When we talk about being enticed, the devil uses bait to entice us. It's a good illustration, I think. But verse 15, when that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. Remember, we talked about the writing style of James, whereas he uses a word that leads us to another thought of the same word. Here is desire. Desire is in verse 14, and it leads us to verse 15, which is another thought about desire. Now, bearing in mind, we've said this disclaimer many, many times, James didn't write in verses, okay? He just wrote a letter. Somebody else decided to break it all up. But here's the thought. When that desire, which is what we're talking about, has conceived. What does it mean to conceive?
Bring forth.
To bring forth, yeah. And in the Greek word here, it means to bring forth offspring. We think about conception. We conceive a child. And there, boom, 9 months later, a child comes along, okay? Sin is conceived, and that's part of the process. But when it is conceived, it gives birth to sin. We know that we all sin, right? What does Romans chapter 3, verse 23 say?
All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Okay, open your Bibles. Let's read that. I don't know how many different versions we got in here. Romans chapter 3, verse 23. Somebody read that for us.
All have sinned and come short of the glory of God.
For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Now, we understand because it says for all have sinned. That would include everybody, right? The part I want you to pay attention to, does anybody have a different rendition of that? Different version? A little bit different word.
For all have sinned and fall
Fall
short.
short. Does anybody have a different version? There's a version that says fallen short, as in past tense. There's a version that says fall short of the glory of God and to come short of the glory of God. If you think about how we as human beings have defined those words, every time we sin, we fall short of the glory of God. And every time we have sinned, we have fallen short of the glory of God. And every time we will sin, we'll come short of the glory of God. And that's just one of the things I thought was interesting about that. 1 John chapter 1, verse 8 and 9. Let's read that together. 1 John chapter 1, verse 8 and 9. It says, again, a new commandment I write to you, which thing is true in him and in you, because darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. He who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in the darkness till now. I have no idea why I wrote that verse.
But that's not
That's not First John 1:8 and 9.
No.
It says, if we say
Shall
that we have
we
no
have
sin.
sin?
That's right. That is chapter 2. You are paying attention. Let's try that.
tested.
1 John chapter 1. If we say that we have no sin and deceive ourselves, the truth is not in us. There we go.
There you go.
If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from what?
Unrighteousness.
From what?
All unrighteousness.
All unrighteousness. That word all appears, I don't know how many times in the New Testament. But sometimes it makes us think, doesn't it? We're all sin and fall short of the glory of God. But yet we all have the ability to stand righteous before God. So as we continue our thought, any questions so far? All right. Well, when this desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. What is sin? To fall short. To transgress. To go against God's will. How would you know if you went against God's will?
Have to know God's
You
will.
got to know what God's will is. You know, Paul told young Timothy, study so that you'll know, right? How do we, it's not through some divine revelation that we understand God's will, is it? No. God has always presented his message through people, through the leaders of the Old Testament, the fathers of Israel, through modern day, through the times of Christ, but through his followers, his disciples, his apostles. Today, through teachers, we have a responsibility that we share that word with others, because God is expecting to use us to spread his message. Now, is it easy? Some of you it is. Some of us it's not. We all have different personalities. But yet God has given that commission to who? We understand that Christ gave it to the disciples. The last verse of Matthew, what does it say? Go ye therefore and what? Teach all nations. It didn't say leave anybody out. Now, I know that in our culture, there's a lot of prejudice, and that's the way people are. Now, it's not right, it's not good, but yet it happens. There are a lot of nations and nationalities out there that harbor a lot of prejudice. Well, they probably won't listen to me anyway. I won't go there, right? God didn't say that, did he? God, through Christ's words, said, go and teach everywhere. That's our responsibility. But yet, we're talking about sin here. When it gives birth to sin, that's that transgression from God. But when that happens, it leads to what? Death. What kind of death do you think this is? Spiritual death. Yeah. According to the Greek, this is more of a spiritual death. Now, what is a spiritual death?
Separation from God.
Separation. Separation from God. Now, could sin lead to a physical death? Absolutely. You know, if I were to go out and get hammered and plow my car into somebody else, I could die. They could die. Yeah, that's a sin leading to physical death. But what does it say? Fear not those who can kill the body, but those who can kill the soul. We don't want to do anything to separate us from God, do we? But yet some of these internal temptations are enticing. And when it's conceived, it leads to sin, and sin leads to death. I think that's pretty plain. Is that message still valid for us 2,000 years after James penned it? I think so. I think so. I don't think it's changed. Let's look at the next couple of verses. Verse 16, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow of turning. One of my favorite verses is in Malachi, chapter 3, where it talks about God showering down his blessings on us. God will shower down more blessings than we could receive. And that's true, right? Would anybody tell me otherwise and believe it? No. God, we talked about last week that God is a giving God. He gives us everything we need, much of which we don't even deserve. But God is a giving God, and every good gift comes from him. First it says in 16, don't be deceived to wander about or stray from the right course. When you're deceived, where does that deception end up? In your own mind. There was a thing I wrote down here. Don't let your mind stray into thinking that God is responsible for your misconduct. I'd like to read that again. Don't let your mind stray into thinking that God is responsible for your misconduct. Listed a bunch of scriptures there about being deceived. Is it easy to be deceived? There's some slick talking people out there, aren't they? Why? I see that most of us in here have a more mature audience. Why are older people targeted for deception? Anybody get a prank phone call? Solicitation? Spam, you know. You know spam's first name? Potential. Because that's what it comes on my phone. His first name is Potential. Last name is Spam. We all get it, but people prey on us. Why? Do we become more susceptible as we get older? One would think we would become more wise, right?
About certain areas.
Wise
We
in
become
certain
very
way.
knowledgeable of certain things because they are part of the growth. And there are other things that we fall in, you know, for example, we're all, well, we're getting there. My wife says we're there. But there's things that we blame God for that's just part of natural process. And we abuse his word when we do charge him.
Absolutely. We do.
And I just find that every day becomes a little different act. That could be deadly, won't be profitable. And overcoming sin is part of the thing that we are. This age here, we've been out on the road of life. We're obviously here because we learned what we need to be able to stay in God's will. I mean, we're not here because we want to vote, right? We're here because we want to please God and learn what we need to do as we go forward. And I think that's part of what sin hates, is people that try to constantly improve themselves. When I say sin, the devil, you know.
The devil is like a roaring lion, seeking about whom he may devour.
That's why I don't answer the phone. I don't give them a a chance to deceive me.
Well, I think that's a wise move, okay? So next time I call you, I'll have to text, right?
Well, yeah.
Sometimes I'll answer just to harass them.
I can see that.
So,
Terry saw it the other day. We were sitting there at the, I don't know, breakfast, lunch, dinner, I don't know. We were eating together. And phone came on, so I put it on speaker. And I said, hello. You know it's a prank call when you don't get a response back. And then somebody says, hello, and then you wait for that recorded message. Yeah. But I started talking to this lady. I don't even remember what I said. I said, are you having a good day? She, well, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. We had them on there for a minute or two, but that's fun. But I like that, okay?
I had a phone call about my car warranty, running out.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't even own a car anymore. And, so I let them give me to the operator, and so they asked me, well, what's your VIN number? I said, you just told me that it come across your desk. You ought to have that information right there in front of you, and so they hung up on me.
I've had them hung up on me before, and I don't like to get into too many long-winded stories, but years ago, I was working at a Ford dealership, and I get this phone call, and the guy said, hey, how's the weather down there? Well, there's your first clue. They ain't from around here, okay? They're from up north. And it was routine for suppliers to call and want you to buy stuff, and they would give you little things. And being in the body business, we use a lot of sandpaper, and this company was called Norton Sand. They made a lot of abrasive products, and the guy said, hey, you like to fish and hunt? Well, sure I do. I'm from the South. And we're giving away either a fishing rod or a shotgun with so much such an order. I had time that day. I said, well, I got plenty of guns and plenty of fishing poles. I said, but Norton. I've heard that name before. Don't you make motorcycles? And the guy said, I don't think we do. I said, I'm pretty sure you do. I've heard of Norton motorcycles. Would you give me a motorcycle? And I went on with this guy for like 20 minutes before he finally hung up. But we need to have fun. I get that as long as we're not rude in doing so. But getting back to the point, we are older and mature. We can be deceived. And when we let our guard down, that deception happens right here in our own mind. So don't let your mind stray into thinking God is responsible for your misconduct. Verse 17, every good and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation of turning. You can look at the notes that we have there from last week. One thing I wrote wrong there, after it said verse 17, where it says it's changed to a verb, well, that's derived from the same root verb, so that should be changed. But it came from above. We think of God as being above because that's where the heavens are. God is in heaven.
what is a perfect gift?
What is a perfect gift?
Salvation,
Everything good.
The gospel.
forgiveness.
If it's good, it's from God. If it's not, it's from Satan.
Very good. Very good. Why does James make distinction? Every good gift and every perfect gift.
Perfect.
You ever got a good gift?
Yeah.
Yeah. You ever got a great gift?
Yeah.
Have you ever got an awesome gift? Have you ever got a perfect gift? There are different levels. If you look at the Greek there, the word dosis is the act of giving. That would be the good gift. If I give you a gift, that's a good gift. The act of giving. And we are to do that with each other. But look at the next one. It comes from the same word, root word, dorema, which is the result of the act of giving. God is the result of that act of giving. So, Sister Francis is right. It comes from God. It's a perfect gift. Brother Hugh is right. Salvation is the perfect gift. Christ, the sinless one who died for us, was the perfect sacrifice. One thing I noted here, when it said it came from above, I wrote, inexhaustible source of all blessings. And when I was reading and studying on that, that struck me. It said, inexhaustible. What does that mean?
It's not gonna run out.
Ain't gonna run out. Wow. Can you imagine as we get older, you know, hopefully we've all made some sort of arrangements for retirement, but there's always that fear that, oh, I'm gonna run out of money before I die, you know? Can you imagine if money was inexhaustible? That would give you a lot of peace and comfort, wouldn't it? God gives us an inexhaustible gifts that will never run out. Now, when you're mean to a dog, what happens? He gets over it. He'll wag his tail again. Okay? We can be mean to God. We can disobey God. We can disrespect God. We can fail God. But yet, He will always come back. That inexhaustible gift that ain't gonna run out. I thought it was pretty awesome. It says here that God's the Father of lights. I think this is in a couple of different thought processes here. One, the physical part, the sun, the moon, and the stars. We have all kind of things going on in the heavens right now. If you look, all the moons that we're having, the full moons, the harvest moon, the snow moon, and the red moon, blood moon, all kind of moons. There's only one but that we see, but we call it different things. There's all sorts of meteor showers, lights. Those are going on. But there's something else about light. Look at 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. And let's make sure that we're in chapter 1. 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. This is the message which we have heard from him and declare to you, that God is light, and in him there's no darkness at all. Can you imagine light? It's a little hard for us to fathom, right? Because it's not totally tangible. We can see the evidence of it. We can't touch it. We can't smell it. We can't feel it with our senses. But God is light. That is incredible when you stop and think about it. God, since he is light, he does not reflect light. God is the light. You know, they say that our sun, you know, as fiery as it is, gives off light. Does our moon give off light?
Reflection. It's a full moon.
Well, it is said that our moon reflects the light of the sun. It doesn't have its own light. Think about that. Now, why can't we see the moon all the time? Because it's on the other side of the world half a day, okay? But yet the earth is turning in the rotation of the planets. Sometimes we'll see a full moon, half moon, quarter moon, okay?
And if you look carefully during the course of the day, you can still see the moon.
Really? You have to have those cockeye binoculars to go around the other side of the world?
Oh, you can see it sitting there in the sky.
Now, I've seen the moon in the afternoon. That's not a problem, you know? But yet, we think about God is the light. There is no shadow, as earth is the shadow. We only see part of the moon, but the sun's over here and the moon's over here, and we only see part of it. God is light. God cannot be a shadow. What do you think about the light? Think about the light of Christ. Can you have the light in you? 1st, 2nd, 3rd John talk about it a lot. You know, do others see the light of Christ in our life? How we act, what we say, what we do. Are we light? Nope. God is light. We reflect His light if we do what He says. Look at verse 18. Of His own will, He brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of His creature. His own will. God did this voluntarily. Could God have survived throughout all time without making earth? Without making us human beings?
Absolutely.
Sure He could. God can do anything. But He chose to do this. The word of truth is perfect, powerful. It says in John 8:32 what? Thy word is truth. The truth will set you free. We're the first fruits of sacrifice. This term would have been familiar to the Jews back then. We are His creatures, His creation. That denotes a relationship. Let's read 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 17 through 19. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 17 through 19. And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves throughout the time of your stay here in fear, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver and gold, for your aimless conduct received by tradition of your fathers. God is our Father. He made us to be like Him. Now, are we like Him? The answer is yes, we are when we are. There are some times that we are like God, and there are some times when we are not, right? God cannot sin, can He? Why? Because of His pure nature. Let's move on to lesson 3. Y'all want to maybe take these and just kind of pass them around. Let's see how far they go. Just pass them around. So we'll talk in groups of passages. We'll go. We may have to make some more. Make about 10 more. We seem to have more people in here than I had anticipated. There we go. So as we're talking about this, we talked about the verses 2 through 12. Talked about that outward temptation. You know, verses 13 through 18. Talked about the inward temptation and God's ability to help us when we are tempted. He made that way of truth for us. The next section is 2 verses. Verses 19 and 20. So let's read 19 and 20 while we're getting some copies made. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. I'm reading from the King James Version. It says, so then, okay? The King James Version says, ye know this, basically what he has just said, you know this. NIV says, take note of this, what he has just said. So then, here we go. Because of what he's just said, my beloved brethren, let every man be. And we've heard this scripture over and over and over and over again. Those three phrases. When he starts off, in light of what we just talked about, you're well aware of the fact that we were brought forth into spiritual life by the word of truth. Therefore, let your life in word and in deed reflect the knowledge you have gained therefrom. We talked about knowledge, didn't we? Yeah. Can you know something and not do it? Absolutely. You can be the smartest person in the room, answer all the questions right, have all the book knowledge, but if you ain't got no common sense, if you can't put it all together in play. Now, I can read a book, a DIY, and I can tell you how to do some carpentry stuff, but I can't do it like Chester. Because Chester knows he can do it.
Takes a lifetime of doing it to be able to get there.
That's that experience
And
factor.
you still don't know it,
But if
know
you-
it all.
If you don't do it, you'll never get any better, right?
That's true.
And that's part of what he's trying to tell the first century Christians in James is, not only do you have to
Hear it.
understand it, you gotta hear it, but you gotta do it. And we've only got a few minutes left here, and then we'll actually start on this next week. But I wanna finish this little section before we start. Swift to hear, always be ready to listen. Be quick to listen too. Slow to speak. That one sometimes we don't take right. Slow to speak means thinking before you speak. It don't mean talking slow, okay? Jeff Foxworthy says, I'm from the South. People hear me talk and automatically deduct 100 points of my IQ. We all talk slow. I get that, okay? But it means thinking before you talk. Slow to wrath. Wrath is violent emotion. You ever worked yourself up where you got so mad? You just grit your teeth and clench your fist? Some people can do that. They work themselves up into a tizzy. Where does that come from? Now, somebody probably did something stupid, but it's interpreted up here. We need to always be swift to hear, always be ready to listen, slow to speak, slow to begin.
We have one mouth and two ears.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's some quotes in here. Men have 2 ears and 1 tongue. Listen twice as much as you speak. Here's one that I'd never heard before. Ears are always open, ready to receive instruction. But the tongue is surrounded by a double row of teeth to hedge it in and to keep it within the proper bounds. That was pretty cool. Speech is silver, silence is golden. We'll read a couple of verses before we finish here. Proverbs, let's go to Proverbs chapter 10. And this is where we'll end the class this morning. Proverbs chapter 10, and it's verse 19, not 9 as I had written there. Proverbs 10:19 says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. Proverbs 13:3, he who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction. Finally, a couple chapters over, Proverbs chapter 19. Excuse me, Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29. Verse 20. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. You've always heard about salesmen or fast talkers. Hasty in words. So as we leave this class this morning, and we'll pick up here next week. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Why? What's the result? The righteousness of God.
And that's a habit. Habit number 5, we teach the kids to see first to understand, then to be understood. Listen much, talk little.
There you go. Seek first. I like that. Let's have a word of prayer before we dismiss. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the time we had in this here this morning. We pray that something that was said might have helped each one of us to be encouraged, and that we might live through the temptations of this life, but honoring you and the life that you've given through your Son for us, that we might follow that we might stand righteous in your sight. Father, it's our goal, our aim, to spend all eternity with you. And it's only because of your promise, because of your mercy, the sacrifice that you gave